All right, Pratik, you can kick it off now.
Perfect. Should we wait for a little bit longer, Emily? I think we only have 16 people so far on the call. Are we expecting any more?
Yes. So if you wanted to give it another minute, we can do so, and then you can just start
Sounds
whenever you're
good.
ready. Thank
Okay.
you.
Well, maybe just give it a couple more minutes.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, it's 1 and 2. I guess we'll start things off. I know we have a lot to cover today. Thank you, everyone, for joining the call. I appreciate you all coming with us today on this call on a busy Monday. I know Mondays can be a little bit hectic for everyone, so I really appreciate everyone jumping on. My name is Pratik, and I'm the Apple Partner Specialist at CDW. We also have my partners here, Ruchi and Fadi. Ruchi is our product specialist for Apple, and Fadi is our product manager at CDW. Thank you guys for joining as well. Kicking us off will be Mike Smith from Apple. Mike actually is an enterprise technical consultant, and he'll be giving us a rundown today on our Apple security platform for the Mac. I know we have quite a bit to cover today, so let's get started. Mike, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Pratik. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning to those like me are on Canada's Pacific time zone. As Pratik mentioned, I'm an enterprise technical consultant here supporting our channel partners and customers in Canada. I've been with the company for about 10 years and spent a bunch of time with customers and partners over that period, helping them integrate our hardware into their enterprise environments. So excited to share a little bit about Apple platform security, specifically around macOS today, and talk a little bit about what you get for free when you buy a Mac from a security and privacy perspective, what kind of hooks and settings are configurable by MDM, and how we're working with other organizations to make it easier to be compliant with any security regulations you have to ensure that everybody who wants a Mac has an opportunity to choose it, and that security isn't a blocker for them there. A big part of the reason we're having a conversation like this today has been a shift in the types of devices that organizations are offering employees. We started to see this probably 7 or 8 years ago when iPhones started gaining traction in the enterprise, and then 4 or 5 years ago, and really accelerating over the last couple of years as a lot of businesses and not-for-profits have had to be more flexible with where and when employees work due to the needs of hybrid work. And as changing demographics in the workplace have shifted how users are demanding different products at work, and Mac has become an important part of those offerings. And the good news is that when it comes to securing Mac OS, there isn't a ton that you need to do. The truth is, most of the people who buy a Mac globally aren't, using it in an enterprise. They don't have a systems administrator or a security analyst or even a chief security officer who's looking over their shoulder, making sure that their data is protected and that the system isn't compromised. They're students and parents and grandparents who are just looking for a device that helps them be productive on the go, and that they can trust, pardon me. And a big part of why we've been able to offer them such a secure platform is our approach to designing security into our platforms at every level, from the silicon up. And this has become even more easy for us as we've moved to Apple Silicon. The firmware and software on a Mac from the lowest levels are designed and built to ensure integrity of the system at every stage, to protect the kernel and user space. So kind of protect the device and the data that runs on the device from compromise by malicious actors. We built upon tried and tested secure design principles, and we use those to provide data separation at an architectural level in the system. And we're really uniquely positioned to do this in the industry because we verify the integrity of the entire stack. We manufacture the hardware, we publish the operating system, and we provide many of the services that are used on our platforms across all organizations. Our security is designed from the silicon up. We press our cryptographic signatures into the silicon at manufacture, and then our secure boot process validates every step of that against that signature, establishing a train of trust and allowing boot to proceed. If you've been a long-time iPhone or iPad user, you've actually probably seen secure boot failure in process. If you've ever seen a device that throws the connect to iTunes logo up during boot, that is there because for some reason, usually because of some just kind of malformed code or some error that's thrown during boot, we halt the process and provide a mechanism to reestablish trust via new firmware and software through a connection with macOS. And so secure boot includes the bootloaders, the kernel, any extensions of the kernel, though we're limiting those as much as we can, and on devices that feature cellular radios, the cellular baseband firmware. And it's designed to verify that at the lowest level, any software that's running on the system hasn't been tampered with. We extend this out to other data that exists through the signed system volume. So this verifies the integrity of system content throughout the process, whether it's code or non-code data, and ensures that we can verify integrity during runtime and reject any of the data that isn't signed by Apple at runtime. So that's sort of how hardware and platform operating system security works in a nutshell generally here. We've got lots that we could go in depth on, and Jamf is going to talk about some of the tools they have to manage these things through MDM. But we want to extend that trust out to the applications that run on that. So on iOS and iPadOS, we've always offered mandatory code signing so that any application that runs on it. And we're extending that to macOS apps that are available through the App Store. This makes sure that at runtime, any executable memory pages are verified as they load to make sure that an app hasn't been modified since it was installed or updated. We also offer Gatekeeper, which is our app blacklist or whitelist utility built into the operating system and is manageable via MDM at the front of app security in macOS to make sure that only signed apps downloaded from the App Store, or whatever permissions you're comfortable with users installing are run when they're launched here. And then we also offer notarization if you want to offer users the choice of apps outside of the App Store, where we're allowing developers who are part of our Apple Developer Program to submit their code, not for review generally around design guidelines or whether or not we think the app provides value, but just to make sure that the code doesn't feature any untrusted or malicious signatures in it. And then we notarize that so that the app runs seamlessly on the system when a user launches it. Apps that don't have notarization throw several errors and make users jump through a lot of hoops to be able to run them, even if they've been installed. And then finally, if any of the other parts of the stack allow something bad to get through, we have a few different anti-malware tools. We have Protect, which is Apple's dictionary essentially of known bad code that we update regularly outside of the software update cycle. So this is constantly happening and updated on the Mac, doesn't require reboots or anything like that. And it will quarantine any apps that we detect to be malicious. And then we have the malware removal tool that's built in at a system level that allows you as administrators to remove any bad code that we can't trust there. Beyond sort of the things that run on the machine, we also have the data that exists on it. And Apple has a long history of different encryption techniques on our platforms. On iPhones and iPads, we've had what we call data protection, which is a system level data encryption policy with a bunch of different classes so that we can balance the needs of the users to be able to, see the contact that's sending them a message on the lock screen when their device isn't unlocked, but make sure we're protecting, truly sensitive data on the device unless the file's open or it's completely protected in some cases. And Mac OS devices that are running Apple Silicon have essentially the same level of data protection, except we eliminate Class D. So all data that's on a Mac is encrypted in some way. The default position for most data is protected until the user first authenticates the machine. And then we have various ways of classifying data beyond that to make sure that it gets higher levels of encryption. All of this benefits employees and IT administrators by providing native data encryption. We leverage the Secure Enclave coprocessor, the same one that's on an iPhone or an iPad on Macs with Apple Silicon. And this ensures that all the key management hierarchies are rooted in hardware. We have a dedicated AES encryption engine that provides incredible performance, both encrypting and decrypting data, and ensures that long-lived encryption keys aren't exposed to the kernel operating system or CPU. It's a dedicated coprocessor separate from the application processor. So we don't allow any of that encryption data to be compromised. So that's data at rest. And then, of course, in a modern world where our devices are connected to the internet 24/7 in many cases, we look at how do we encrypt data in transit, and we do that in a number of ways again. Applications that are installed with the operating system or downloaded from the App Store must pass rigorous app transport security requirements. This makes sure that they're adhering to best practices for secure connections out to cloud or other internet resources. And by default, we're making sure that the ciphers that those app designers are using include only forward security suites of data ciphers. So we're really ensuring and being prescriptive on what we believe to be data in transit best practices for all of our developers. We provide transparency to users so that if a user tries to navigate to an application or a domain that we can't verify the certificate for, either because it's expired or it's from an untrusted source, we can view that certificate and then make an informed decision. And again, you can block that by default as administrators. And then we have industry standard support for VPN. Different ways to be configured. We can do it locally with the built-in VPN client in macOS, or of course, many third-party VPN providers have apps that run natively using Swift and other frameworks for virtual private network connections. So these are all the things that you really get for free on macOS. We've got deep history of hardware security building on the foundations that made iPhone so popular and extending that into Macs with our own custom silicon. We've got incredible data protections at rest and in transit. And for many organizations, this is the peace of mind they need to offer an employee choice. But increasingly, as Mac has gained purchase in the market, we've looked at how do we ensure administrators and organizations and people who take on the risk of a new cyber device are able to prove compliance against the organizations that regulate them. And if you think about it, security is really how do we protect the system? How do we make sure that the applications and things like that can be trusted? Privacy is how we protect the user and their data. And the compliance is a good way to protect the organization. And so we have looked at the compliance landscape. We've seen organizations like the ones you see on the slide here that produce guidance for governments and enterprise customers. Most organizations that do business with the U.S. federal government are abiding by the NIST 853 guidance that they publish. And so these are the organizations that are sort of defining what secure looks like. The challenge has been it's taken a lot of time for our customers to be able to not only match the guidance up with the capabilities of macOS, but then to publish documentation and remediation plans to become compliant. And in order to solve these challenges, some Apple system engineers and volunteers and employees of the National Institutes for Standards and Technologies, with the help of NASA, the DOE, and a new way to deliver tested and validated for macOS. It was important to the folks who were part of this project that it be developed by administrators for administrators of macOS devices and that it ship day and date with macOS so that we're not waiting for these bodies to produce guidance for weeks or months after a new version of macOS, like we're anticipating macOS Ventura to be released shortly. And not only to provide it day and date, but to leverage Apple's best practices. So to scope them against MDM configuration profiles and shell scripts, and that it be able to be produced repeatable and scalable results that can be used and deployed via MDM. And the result of that project was the macOS Security Compliance Project. The project supports well-respected baselines from CIS, Center for Internet Security, and DISA, as well as a policy control mapping to the 853 by NIST. And this allows customers to choose policies using a risk-based approach and really to transfer risk from the administration and the organization to these policy setting bodies. Using the project, you can create custom baselines by tagging the rules that exist in the project, by editing one of the pre-existing baselines, or to use a crosswalk mapping file. So in Canada, most organizations that are doing business with our federal government use the NTSG 33. And there's a crosswalk mapping document that exists for that with the NIST 853 that allows you to take all relevant and kind of similar policy rules and map them together to create a baseline from the NIST 853. And really automate the documentation and remediation process. The best part of the project is its low barrier to entry. It's free software hosted on NIST's GitHub. And the project is committed to providing day of release support for our new operating systems. It has a programmatic approach to compliance. The project is structured in such a way that when paired with a modern MDM and some pre-developed code, you can run this when new guidance or new operating systems emerge and quickly produce, up to hundreds of pages of your plan for compliance that specifies what you're checking for and how you're remediating anything that isn't correct on a client machine. And then produces all of the mobile configs and scripts that can be deployed via MDM to scale it across your organization. The output of the document has a bunch of different data types, including data syndication tools like XML extension attributes that can be imported to large data analysis tools like Splunk or Nessus from Tenable. And it's really an incredible project. I've never seen anything like this in my 10 years at Apple. It's been a huge project by the folks at some of these institutions who've taken upon themselves to really modernize the way compliance happens on macOS. And it's had incredible vendor support from companies like Jamf, who build the tools that actually help us implement this. So I hope that that was a quick overview of what security looks like on the Mac. Like I said a few times, what you get for free when you buy a Mac, what's some of the variables are that can be controlled by the organization that's deploying it and the administrators that are tasked with securing it, and then how we're proving that out through different compliance tools. I'm going to hand it over now to the folks at Jamf, who will talk a little more concretely and a little more practically around the tools that they offer that allow an organization to make great decisions and implement their security plans on macOS and on iOS for that matter. Thanks a lot. I'll stick around and monitor the chat and happy to answer any questions at the end of the day here.
Thank you so much, Mike. Could you just confirm that everyone can see my screen and it's visible?
Yeah, looks good to me. So
Excellent. Greetings, everyone. My name is Osama Iqbal. I'm a field sales engineer with Jamf, and we are here today to talk to you about the security features that Jamf offers. All right, and my slides are stuck. There we are. All right, so I'm going to talk to you about what we do, what security solutions we offer, show you some demos and workflows on how we do what we do, and then we'll leave time for some questions. So what is Jamf? So Jamf started out about over 20 years ago in 2002 in a university where our co-founder needed a MDM solution for Mac. The university had a bunch of Macs and there was no way to manage them. There's plenty of solutions to manage Windows devices, STCM, Intune, you name it, but there's nothing at the time for Mac. So he built something to manage the university Apple fleet. And slowly the fleet grew, and Apple saw that there was a need for management solutions. They started building MDM protocols within their systems. And as Apple built these systems, they worked together with Jamf so that we were supporting those systems on day one, which means every time a new operating system was launched or a new hardware came out in the market, Jamf was supporting it the day that it launched. And this is something that, again, we're the only MDM providers that do that. And over the years, we saw that MDM wasn't the only place where enterprise needed help with Apple. Security and identity had big gaps. And today we cover those as well. And that's what my presentation will be focused on. So to simplify, we help organizations succeed with Apple. We bridge the gap between Apple and enterprise. And we've been an Apple first company ever since. Like I said, we have long roots, started back in 2002. And we're still leveraging and working together with Apple. I'd like to give an example here that when Apple moved to M1, which was a big leap in security, many of the management softwares and security tools weren't ready to support M1 to the point where companies were scrambling to get their hands on any Intel-based Macs because they knew their infrastructure isn't ready to support M1. So they wanted to stock up as long as they did. If I remember correctly, I think for Microsoft's Intune, it took about a year before they could support any M1 Macs. But Jamf was doing it from day one, and that's something we like to call zero-day support. So like Mike mentioned, the footprint of Apple in the enterprise is growing, and it has quadrupled in the last decades, especially given COVID. 70% of our workforce doesn't sit behind a desk anymore. They are remote all over the world, and hybrid work is here to stay, and there's no doubt about that. Which brings us challenges of managing computers, keeping them secure because they're no longer part of your internal network. It's very easy for an IT administrator to secure a closed office network, but now with devices all over the world, it poses a challenge. So Jamf has a fleet of products that we offer from management to identity protection, identity and access control to protection. And we have recently expanded our suite of apps to network threat defense. We acquired a company called Wandera, which allows us to do things at the network level. And our network suite of products is not just limited to Apple. This is the first time where we are expanding the scope to Windows and Android devices because network protection is very similar no matter what your endpoint is. Building for an operating system is a much different story, and that's where Jamf will continue to be an Apple first company. So today, my focus with you will be on protecting your data, starting with endpoint security. Like Mike mentioned, Macs are inherently secure. They come with some of the best security tools built in, Xprotect, Gatekeeper, you name it. But just as a Windows device, when you take this endpoint and you connect it to a larger enterprise, you become part of a bigger network, which means you are now faced with much bigger threats. The footprint of Mac is growing. Mac adoption has gone up quite a bit. Macs have become more prevalent with business and enterprise, with about 23% of the enterprise devices in the US in 2020 were all Macs. And 16% of the global market share is now owned by Mac, and Jamf was able to prevent about 6% of attacks on these devices in 2021. And the reason this is all changing as rapidly as it is because there's a big uptick in a few things. A lot of millennials are joining the workforce, and they want Apple devices very similar to the devices they have at home, and sometimes often the devices they've used at their education institutions. And then companies like Jamf have helped enterprise manage these devices. So when enterprises see how easy it is to manage Apple devices, almost as easy as managing Windows, sometimes even better, they're now open to adopting Apple devices into their enterprise, whether it be Macs, whether it be iPhones, iPads, you name it. And then came along Apple with M1, which was, like I said, a big leap in IT security, and that gave enterprises more reasons to adopt Apple products. Now let's talk about network detection and antiviruses. So the challenge today is there's a plethora of products out there in the market, and they're amazing products too, but a lot of them were built with the PC in mind, with the Windows computer in mind. When you take the same product to manage an Apple device fleet, you either have a poor user experience because they weren't built the way Apple wants their products to function. There's limited protection. For example, with the introduction of macOS Catalina, kernel extensions were a thing of the past. They were no longer part of the operating system. And a lot of these endpoint protection systems were built on kernel extensions, which meant either the company has to reissue a whole different product or mothball it or do something else. In a lot of instances, companies wouldn't want to upgrade to the latest operating system or change hardware because that would mean their malware protection and their antiviruses would no longer be functioning. Another reason was the lack of vendor support from these antivirus platforms. Apple is known for their consistent innovation in both software and hardware. And if your vendors can't keep up with that innovation, it defeats the purpose of having Apple in your enterprise. So Jamf today focuses on endpoint detection and remediation, as well as with our acquisition of Vendora, we've now even expanded to network protection. The primary objective here is to allow Macs to have the best in-breed endpoint protection possible. For instance, like I said, with newer operating systems, a lot of the times your antivirus solutions will become obsolete. But because Jamf works with Apple before any hardware or software change is released, we are ready for that change day one. Like Mike mentioned, a new operating system Ventura is about to be released, I believe, on October this month. And the day it released, Jamf will be able to support it. So if your user says, I want that operating system today, you don't have to hold it back. You can get all your fleet updated, and Jamf will still be able to manage, protect, and connect it to endpoints with no issues. I want to show you next a quick demo of what it looks like when a user launches any malicious software on their computer, a computer that's being managed by Jamf Protect. And I want to use the example of a Trojan. It's called OSX0. It's a pretty good example because what it does, it pretends to be an application that's signed. So you will think you're running Microsoft Remote Desktop or something, but instead it's actually a malware. So if you look at it here, as soon as the end user clicks on that malware thinking it's something else, the built-in protection kicks in Apple to say, hey, are you sure you want to run this? And the customer then says, yes, of course, I think this is software, and he allows that to run. And then you see Jamf Protect comes in and says, hey, this is not, this is a malicious content, we can't let you run it, and it blocks it. And very quickly, you can see that the preventable malware is prevented from being executing. And then what you see on your screens right now is what it will look like on the Jamf admin portal. You see the host information and the user involved. You see the path to the malware file detected and the name of the malware because it was picked up on our threat signature matched. And in the background, this malware was quarantined and the threat was neutralized. Let's look at another example of what happens. Let's say your company policy says you can't plug in any USBs onto the Mac unless they are encrypted. That means the data is protected. So here you can see the user experience when a personal USB device is inserted in a Mac. This is encrypted and doesn't need the removable storage control policy. The device is preventing from mounting, and the user is notified with a customizable message why the event occurred and how to proceed with an alternative workflow. It says the USB you have doesn't meet the security requirements. Could you please encrypt it? Try it again. And you can customize it to make it look any way you like to. And the one thing I want to mention is notice the way these messages are displayed. The way we built our user experience, we wanted to have the same feel as a Mac operating system is meant to feel, which is something our competitors don't offer today. So let's talk about next cloud security identity. Like I said, one of the big things we saw in the enterprise today was authentication. The best way to make sure that your data is secure is to authenticate a user before they access it, a user, an application, you name it. And today's world, zero trust is the best way of doing that. It's a security framework that requires all users, whether in or outside the organization network, to be authenticated, authorized, and continuously validated for security configuration and posture before granting or keeping access to a application or data. So zero trust assumes that there's no traditional network. Network can be local or in the cloud or a combination of hybrid resources anywhere. So the best way to do it, a lot of you are probably using, let's say, Microsoft Azure in the background. That is your identity provider. When someone logs into a Windows computer, he has to authenticate with his Azure credentials. If the credential matches, they can get into the device or they can access application on a particular device. With Jamf Connect, the same functionality can now be given to an Apple device. You no longer have to bind computers like they used to. So when a user's password expires, they'll get a notification on their Mac saying, your password is expiring in 4 days, please update. If you have a setting in your Azure AD saying that two-factor authentication is enabled for all IT users, anytime a IT department person logs into a computer, he will have to validate through two-factor authentication, get a text message on his cell phone, or whichever other way, Zscaler or any other platform you're using. So it'll, whatever security and privacy controls you have, whatever authentication controls you have in your backend, whether it be Microsoft, Google, or Okta, Jamf Connect allows the same process to be pushed over to Macs. So it all boils down to account provisioning. It can be set up over the air, authentication and verifying the user, and syncs the passwords to avoid Mac lockouts. So if a password expires, it doesn't lock the person out of the Mac. And Jamf Connect talks to Intune. So any policies, if you have a company-wide policy to say every computer requires two-factor authentication, Intune pushes that settings out to the Windows computers. Jamf will push the same settings out to the Apple computers and report back to Intune. So you have one pane of glass where you can view all your settings. You can see what's compliant, what's not, and move on from there. Next up, I'm going to show you how all of this looks like from a user experience. Say you have a new user that's starting your company and you ship them a brand new Mac. They open the box, there's no IT intervention. They get to set this computer up just the way they would when they buy something off the market. Of course, since this computer is connected to your MDM, to Jamf Pro, they will see some additional screens. So they do what they would traditionally do is select a language, a country, perhaps connect to a Wi-Fi, and then Jamf starts pushing some remote management software down. You can customize the terms of use, so the user sees whatever you want them to see. Perhaps they have to accept the company policy, or some alerts or a help desk phone number if they need help. Jamf Connect will then take their credentials, authenticate them against Azure, Okta, or Google, whichever identity provider you have. And then you can put some additional settings. You could say things like, once authenticated, please encrypt everything on the device. This way, if someone was to walk away with it, they wouldn't just have access to company data. You can have tutorial videos for them to see how this works, company keynotes, you name it. So all of those settings and provisions are pushed over the year. Again, there's no need for a IT professional to step in the middle and set up the device. It's all happening over the internet. And this device could be anywhere in the world. It doesn't have to be in your office network. It'll take its management settings from the MDM, and then it'll take its identity and access settings from Jamf Cloud. Again, all these setup steps will only appear for the very first time. It doesn't go through that every time you log into a Mac. Once the initial setup is done, I will show you here what the logon screen will look like. And at times when all these settings come down from the internet. So this is what a typical logon screen would then look like. On a computer, you can have your company logo on it. And then every time the person logs in, an authentication request goes to your identity provider. It checks with Azure to say, yep, this person's an employee. These are the resources it has access to. Let's push those resources down onto this computer. And every time you were to take the resources off or disable anything, likewise, a sync would happen and it would disable and enable things accordingly. Moving on. let's talk about network security. So like I said, with the latest acquisition of Wandera, Jamf now not only protects endpoints once there's any malicious software on there, we can now stop threats at a network level. So which means before they even get to the device, you can now lock them down. This solution isn't just agnostic to Apple. It works on Android and Windows as well, because like I said, network operations traffic looks all the same, no matter which device. And with today's workforce, there's vulnerabilities with risky applications, public Wi-Fi hotspots, phishing. Phishing is a very big one where you get an email saying, hey, someone else is trying to access your Apple ID. Please click here to prevent it. And you give up your username and password. And we see phishing as the #1 cause for security breaches around the world. Companies have some amazing settings, but if your end user gives it all away, there's nothing you can do to protect that. So here's what the challenges exist today, and how do we overcome them? You would need an always-on network protection. You'll need some real-time assessments, so your AVR, EDR solution is constantly scanning the device to see that nothing's been infected. The IT security team needs detailed insights. So if X Protect was to prevent something on the device, it needs to report back to your IT security team saying, hey, there was an infection and we've mitigated it. And then you want all of that unified in one platform. How do I get one pane of glass where I can see everything happening? And that's where Jamf comes in. We will protect, manage, and connect your device to identity solutions. You got endpoint security, you got network security, and you have identity access management all in one pane of glass. And Jamf Threat Defense, which is our network defense product, is powered by Miriam, which is an award-winning mobile threat intelligence engine. In addition to providing protections across all threat vectors, Jamf Threat Defense includes zero-day phishing protections and very rich app intelligence. If you look up Miriam, you can see this is the state-of-the-art award-winning threat intelligence system in the world right now. So this is what it would look like for an end user. Let's say he gets a phishing email in his mail app. It says, hey, someone's trying to access your Apple ID. Please click here to update your information. And these emails are starting to look very much like they come from Apple or any other vendor, Google, Microsoft. So as soon as the person clicks on it, he'll be given a notification, hey, this is not a safe link. It's being stopped because of this reason. And in a lot of instances, we also give the user information on why it was stopped or what was happening. So they're not left in the dark. They get a little prompt like this to tell them, click here and you'll see some more information. And now if the same network attack was happening on a mobile device, Jamf Threat Defense, again, gives the user detailed instructions on what happened, why was this blocked, and it has a list of how many times your device has been hit. So it educates the user completely. So every time he sees it again, the user knows there's a phishing link for next time. So there's constant education as well as prevention happening. Now let's talk about reporting and compliance. Like Mike was saying, Apple is working on something called the macOS compliance project, which is going to make compliance a breeze. I was fortunate enough to see a demo of this product not too long ago. And right now, as someone who's worked as a systems administrator and systems architect, compliance reporting is a very long and lengthy process. You need detailed audit reports to show your auditors that we are PCI compliant or SOC 2 compliant, what they would be. But Jamf makes this very easy by something called Compliance Reporter, which can take all your data and feed it into your existing SIEM. If you have a security information and event management software, say Splunk, for example, Jamf Compliance Reporter can take all that information, take all that telemetry data, feed it to there so you get a holistic approach of what's happening on all your endpoints. So we got very detailed compliance report. And let's look at an example of how that would work. So let's say we have an example scenario where a threat hunter can navigate data points from Compliance Reporter in the scene. So let's say we spot an anomalous outbound connection from an endpoint in your environment, a connection to an unexpected IP address or a port in a region you'd not expect. We might have been alerted to this by the SIEM or found this through proactive threat hunting, whatever the case would be. We can easily firsthand understand which application created the connection, including the signing developer information. And let's call this bad app and it's signed by an unknown developer. You can then dig deeper into the behavior of that specific application to understand any related commands and process arguments. So what else did this bad application do? Well, it established the behavior is something that we are concerned about. We saw something malicious and we're like, this does not look right. Moving on, the application isn't something we're familiar with, so we can easily pivot to a new search to understand when and how the application was installed on that device. Was it by the user of that Mac? Was it a management task? And where was it downloaded from? So we now know that which app created the connection, all the related activity, how the app was installed, and where the installer came from. We can then attribute this chain of events to any user that was involved by reviewing the user ID associated to the events. Is this a real user in your environment? And finally, we now have essentially a blueprint of suspicious indicators from the overall event that we can use to search for same behavior. The same pattern, like is this happening across other endpoints? Or is it unique to just this one endpoint? So we can establish a trend across endpoints, certain location. And this was all done just inside the search function of your scene, as just one example. So essentially, let's just say, once you gather all the data from Jamf security solutions, just like storyboarding, you now want to push it into the tools you have for telemetry connection or SIEMs. And this is where I want to say Jamf shines. You can have flexible controls for routing the detection alert data to wherever you are. You can send it to your Amazon S3 Cloud, for example, Microsoft Sentinel, whichever SIEM you're using to, we can send that data straight to it. Or you can even configure it to say, send me the data straight from the endpoint directly to my SIEM solution, so that you get even more faster reporting. And this is just one of the many workflows you can build through Jamf Protect to get amazing telemetry data. If you are, example, using Splunk, the dashboard code is available upon request. And this example dashboard shows the data from our XDR solution. And we can always give you the code to just put it into Splunk and it'll break it down into these amazing looking reports for you. This is just one example. I use Splunk because I think that's one of the things that are being used in the industry more. But like I said, if you use something else like Microsoft Sentinel or Amazon S3, we have built-in dashboards that we can build for you for those as well. So when feeding Windows security data into your backend, here's an example of how the workflow would look to get data into your SIEM or your source solution, whatever you have over there. Similar idea, you can build workflows that take the data either from the endpoint to Jamf Cloud and then to your SIEM or directly to your SIEM, whichever option you prefer. And I want to show you what Jamf Protect looks like once you log into it. So this is the Jamf portal, which an administrator can view from the cloud. And let me go over a few things to see what might be of interest to you. So reporting devices policies all in one pane of glass. You can see how management is working on here. Let me pull up some reports. So integrations are also built into here. For example, integrations for your backend Microsoft solution. You have a dashboard which has got detailed view and everything. So you can get very granular on each device to see what's happening. Is it in compliance? Is it not? This one, for instance, is out of date. And the others are compliance and no open threats on those. And what you have here is your UEM integration. So if your organization is running Microsoft as a backend, you can easily configure those identity providers here. So anytime someone logs into a device, they need to be authenticated by your identity provider, Google, Okta, Microsoft, you name it. Right. Well, threat response, that's actually another cool feature where it'll show you all the attacks that have happened to your device, what the platform did to remediate them, and you can filter them by devices, laptop, mobile device, you name it. And also tell you the source of all these attacks. So if you want to run an investigation on where they started, how do I prevent it? It's very simple to go from here. All right, so to recap, Jamf now overcomes your VPN challenges by putting together a zero trust network for you. We can detect, remediate threats, and report on everything that's happening in your Apple fleet. We can securely identify while provisioning with our Jamf Connect solutions, and we integrate with partners like Splunk, Microsoft, and we can feed data directly into your SIEM solutions. So if any of these interest you or you would like more information, reach out to your CDW rep. They will be more than happy to help you. They can schedule a demo for you, and I will gladly run demos for you, show you how the product works. Try it out, play around with it. Tons of resources at your disposal. You got some amazing account reps working for you. I do want to pitch in the JNUC or Jamf National User Conference, which actually starts tomorrow. It's happening in San Diego, but if you don't feel like flying out there, you can always watch the keynote as well as the presentation virtually. It starts tomorrow, run for the next 3 days, and you'll be able to see product demos from Jamf experts, so you can learn best practices, enjoy a preview of upcoming functionality. You have some really deep dive technical sessions to walk through advanced workflows, and a lot of these keynotes are actually led by our customers. Microsoft is going to be delivering a keynote on how they manage their devices at Microsoft. They use Jamf to manage all their Apple devices at Microsoft. Apple will be part of it as well to show you how they're leveraging Jamf for their workflows. So a ton of good material if you're looking for any more information on how to better manage their network. That's all we have for you today. Any questions for myself or for Mike? All right, silence is key. I can't see the chat. Nathan, if you see anything in there, do flag it.
Yeah, I got one here. Looks like it's for you. So it's from Aditya Patel. Let's say by some reason user was not able to enroll Jamf properly. Will that user bypass Jamf enrollment and set up computer and later enroll profile manually? Since Jamf Connect will also authenticate the user credentials as shown in the presentation.
Okay, so the way Apple has built enrollment is almost impossible to bypass it. So let's just say the only way you bypass is, let's say you already have an existing fleet of devices out there, and now you're implementing Jamf. So if any new device, as soon as you open the box, it automatically gets enrolled into Jamf. You can't bypass it. If there's users that are already existing out in the field, then yes, you will have to send them a link, and they will have to use that link to enroll into Jamf. Once they're enrolled, they are, yes, the existing account that's on that computer. Once they're enrolled, you have the option to start pushing settings to their existing account. But yes, you do have to depend on that user to manually enroll because the fleet of devices is already out there. So it all depends on, do you already have a fleet of devices or are you starting up new? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and where there might be some confusion there that I can add some more context. Macs that were running Intel x86 processors, they didn't have the require network connection flag in the enrollment profile. So you used to be able to activate a Mac without connecting to network, and since there's no network connection, there's no way to verify whether or not the device is an Apple Business Manager. But that's no longer true on M1s. So you can make it so that the user has to connect to a network in order to proceed with activation. And at that point, it'd be caught by Apple Business Manager and enroll. And if you're using Jamf Connect to do your identity validation, then it would go through and authenticate and enroll and be configured automatically. But yeah, that's sort of more of a legacy problem with Intel Macs.
And this is why I say M1 is by far the biggest security leap in Apple devices. Just makes it better.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Basically, it brings well, not quite, but like a lot of the security and privacy capabilities that we're used to on iPhone to Mac.
Absolutely. I saw
Another
something else
question
come up
here,
in
we
the
have
chat.
Macs that are not an ABM. So can this allow us to still use Jamf?
Yes, you can use Jamf on Macs that are not an ABM. The caveat being that if your user wanted to format the computer and walk away with it, they can do that. But if there are an ABM, then once they're enrolled, you can't get them out. You can format it, replace hardware, do whatever. ABM is amazing; it'll not let go of that computer. But yes, if they are not an ABM, you can still enroll it. The other thing, that restriction is, once your device is an ABM, there's something called supervised mode, which gives you really granular control over your device. For example, with the new iOS, there's an option to unsend messages. You send someone a message and you don't feel like it, you can remove that. Jamf has the capability to disable that feature. but only for those Macs which are an ABM. If the Mac's not an ABM, that's a limitation of sorts. But as far as identity and security are concerned, there's no limitations there. Without ABM as well, those can be implemented. Did I miss anything there, Mike?
Yeah, so I think the supervision is kind of the more critical piece of that. So Apple Business Manager allows Jamf to supervise devices automatically on enrollment. And supervision is pretty important to managing security on the device if you want to do things like escrow file vault keys and things like that. To or you know, in the your follow-up question there, George, supervision does not permit a user to remove the enrollment profile. You could kind of think of a manually enrolled device that doesn't use ABM as the enrollment mechanism. It's treated by Jamf as essentially owned by the person who's using the device versus Apple Business Manager deputizing Jamf and the organization as the owner of the device. So you can do things like manage bootstrap tokens, a lot of important things. So if you want to have more conversations kind of around deployment workflows and what's enabled or disabled by default, that's definitely a conversation worth having. But yeah, if do everything you can to get your devices into ABM. If they were bought by CDW, pardon me, they can backdate them into the program. So even if they've been deployed, you can get them into ABM. Yeah, they weren't. Well, you know, less we can do to help you there. Though definitely reach out to your account manager. You know, maybe there's something else we can do for you there. Depending on the age of them, we might be able to do a buyback offer and get you new devices that can be enrolled in ABM or something like that. So, good questions though. And yeah, if you want to have more conversations about managing specifically devices that are enrolled through device enrollment rather than automated device enrollment, reach out to your account manager and we can chat with you.
And just to add to that, Mike, very well said. A device that's not an ABM is almost treated like a BYOD device. And just like a Jamf does extend to BYOD devices, where it'll separate the work profile, and those devices don't have to be in ABM, so yes, they're not supervised.
Another question here for you, Soma, from Cameron Baker. Is it possible to route telemetry data to different systems based on some computer properties? Example, Canadian computers report to Canadian telemetry SIEM servers, US computers report to US SIEM servers.
Yes, Jamf Protect does allow you to configure multiple SIEMs because companies do have that. They want to say all the iPhone data goes to Microsoft and the other one to the other one. So yes, short answer, yep, you can split it, your data by device properties to say, if the model's an iPhone, go to this SIEM. If the model's a Mac, go to this SIEM. Or any other attribute. Model is just one example I used. Excellent.
Good questions.
Yeah, good stuff. And like Mike said, if you ever want to talk more about this, reach out to your CDW rep. They will get you in touch with us, and we're happy to have sessions with all of you offline.
Yeah, as you can imagine, a topic like security is and not something we typically cover in 30. Just kind of an introduction to what's out there. And yeah, if you have specific questions, please reach out and we can go deeper on the things that are relevant to your organizations.
Agree. This is as high level as we could get, but yeah, there's we can really dive deep into it. All right, if that's everything, I'd like to hand it back to Emily.
Yep. So thank you so much, guys, and thank you everyone for joining today.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.